We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. We choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. We gonna heal. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. We choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. We gonna heal. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. We choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. Like a promise. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. 'Cause we choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. For our people. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. Right now. We choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. That's right. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. 'Cause we choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy. For our people. We gonna heal the hate in this nation. We gonna heal the hate. Right now. We choose democracy in this nation. We choose democracy.
Miriam, thank you very much for coming on and making it through. I know there was like a couple of scheduling back and forth we had to do to make this happen, but I'm so glad to do this because I know you from college and I've seen some of the work you've done in activist spaces and I've been amazed by it and blown away by it. And so getting to talk to you about this very urgent thing, I think will be really great for the audience of Power Report. So when I first came across Hold the Line, I think it actually might have been something that you sent to me. I was like, okay, yes, this is a cool thing. Finally, there is like a direct document for people to be able to utilize and figure out what to do exactly in this moment. But I'm, of course, like a very politically kind of obsessed, I guess you could say, person. And so, of course, I'm wanting this thing. But what made you kind of realize that or like you and the other co-authors realized that there was a need for this document to exist?
Yeah, so this was a couple of months ago. I mean, the work I do on a day-to-day basis is to essentially come up with like ways for everyday people to get involved in different movements. Like that's essentially what I'm constantly trying to experiment with, constantly trying to figure out. And with some of the organizations we were working with, this big question kept popping up of, are we actually doing enough for like this election? Like we're trying to do like the standard, like let's get everybody out to vote work, but are we actually doing enough to make sure that every single person is going to be able to participate this year and that the election is actually going to be fair and free and that it's actually going to turn out the way elections are supposed to turn out? And the answer was no. Like we don't know if we're confident in that. And I think like a tipping point happened. I think this was on June 1st. I think you probably remember this too, when this was when the George Floyd protests were happening, and Trump, in Washington, D.C., he basically allowed both the military and the police to essentially shoot rubber bullets at protesters. He also threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, which basically gives him the power to use the military against civilians.
This will be the most corrupt election in the history of our country.
I'm Jessel Noor for the Real News Network. Are the American people prepared to stop a coup?
If I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that. And I'll tell you what,
does that mean,
from a common sense,
does that mean you're
I'll tell you what it means.
People to take to
it
the
means
street?
you have a fraudulent election. You're sending out 80 million ballots. They're not equipped to. These people aren't equipped to handle it. Number one. Number two, they cheat.
It's becoming increasingly clear that Donald Trump may not accept the results of the presidential election if he loses.
You commit here today for a peaceful transferal of power after the election.
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster. Get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation.
Well, our next guest argues that a well-organized people can stop a November coup, and they've done it many times before. Worth mentioning, often in countries where the U.S. government is the one behind those coups. Now joining us to discuss this is George Lakey. His most recent book, How We Win, is a guide to nonviolent direct action campaigning. He's a columnist for WagingNonviolence.org, which recently published the viral piece, 10 Things You Need to Know to Stop a Coup by Daniel Hunter.
10 things you need to know to stop a coup. 1. Don't expect results on election night. Ballots will come in for days or weeks after Election Day. Be prepared for confusing weeks and debunked news stories. We need to make sure all votes are counted. 2. We need to call it a coup. If the government stops counting votes, declare someone a winner who actually lost, or allow someone to stay in power who didn't win the election. 3. Coups have been stopped by regular people throughout history all over the world. 4. Be ready to act quickly and not alone. Talk to 5 people who would join you in the streets to protest if there is a coup. 5. Focus on values, not individuals. We use the language choosing democracy rather than any specific candidates. 6. Convince people not to freeze. History tells us that the way people react in the hours and days after a coup attempt will determine whether or not the coup succeeds. We need everyone to take action. 7. Commit to nonviolence. Nonviolent mass resistance and non-cooperation includes strikes, refusing business as usual, and shutting down society until a democratically elected leader is installed. 8. Yes, a coup can happen in the United States. Whenever there is an order to stop counting votes, we call it a coup. 9. Center and calm, not fear. Be a reliable source. Double-check rumors and spread only facts. Breathe deeply. Play out scenarios, but don't become captured by them. 10. Prepare before the election. Vote. Volunteer at the polls. Urge elected officials to count every vote before a winner is called, and prepare our communities to resist. The best way to stop a coup is never to have one. Are you ready? Sign the pledge at choosedemocracy.us.
Daniel couldn't join us for this discussion, but recommended we get George in his place. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So we're in these unprecedented times for the United States, but we are facing a scenario that has played out in dozens of countries around the world. So there are lessons that we can learn from other struggles and from movements within this country that have taken place historically. We've all read this, a lot of us have read this great piece by Daniel in Waging Nonviolence. Can you take us through some of what, the nonviolent movement around the world has learned when facing these situations?
Actually, we have an advantage over a number of the places where there's been research done on how those coup attempts were defeated. We had the advantage of already having so many people in motion, thanks to Black Lives Matters and the climate crisis and other issues, the incarceration, mass incarceration. There have been a whole series of issues that have gotten Americans moving. So it's not a situation of we're a sluggish body politic, that has to be awakened. We're very much an awakened population. And so I think we have an advantage over some of the countries that have needed to get themselves ready to take on a coup and have successfully defeated it.
So one of the things that Donald Trump has done, and it's been it's emerging as a central part of his campaign, is claiming without evidence that Democrats are rigging the election against him. He's claimed mail-in voter fraud will cost him a victory.
What's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well.
So Trump's FBI director recently told Congress there's no evidence of mass voter fraud, but that hasn't stopped Trump from developing, quote, contingency plans to bypass the election results and appoint local electors in battleground states where Republicans hold the legislative majority. That's according to a piece published last week by Barton Gellman in The Atlantic that asks, if the vote is close, Donald Trump could easily throw the election into chaos and subvert the result. So, George, what are some resources people can use and access to help them organize and be prepared in the weeks ahead?
It would be excellent if we could deter Donald Trump from even trying this. And one means of doing that has actually worked in the past with regard to a president who is tempted to do a reckless thing is to get masses of people to sign a pledge saying that they won't go along with an abridgment of our rights, of our voting rights, that we are going to insist that every vote be counted. So we've created on the website choosedemocracy.us, that's choosedemocracy.us, we've created a pledge that many thousands of people are now signing. And the idea of that is that we can show in advance that so many people are united. That actually stopped Ronald Reagan from invading from Honduras, where he'd stationed U.S. troops, invading Nicaragua at an awkward moment in the 80s. We need to deter him if possible. But the other advantage of that website is that it offers evidence-based, and that's an underlined, evidence-based, it offers those resources that enable people to find out the concrete things that they can do as an attempted coup may unfold. And also, it announces trainings. There are thousands of people already enrolling for trainings because it's, in a way, it's like a nonviolent army we're developing here. We will do better if we train to meet whatever comes.
All right, George Lakey, thank you so much for joining us, a columnist for Waging Nonviolence, which recently published the viral piece, 10 Things You Need to Know to Stop a Coup. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and so heartened by all the messages from all the amazing women about the intersection of issues and the connection between all the issues. That really, really rings true to me. And I'm thrilled that you're inviting Choose Democracy on, because we know that if all issues hit working class women, and especially women of color, harder, that's going to be especially true of a coup. All of the issues that have been named tonight, from climate change to fair wages, transportation, healthcare, all of it is threatened if we have an illegal power grab. And so what happened this summer was some nonviolent trainers started thinking, like, this doesn't look good. We've never actually had a president before who is dropping hints all over the place that he might not accept the results of an election. What are we going to do about this? And so people started reading the history of nonviolent resistance to coups. And my first message is that they found something very, very encouraging, which is that around the world, we have examples of people standing up and saying no to undemocratic power grabs. And just through mass participation and nonviolent discipline, creative strategizing, people being able to win back control of their democracies in the face of people who want to grab power illegally. So in looking at those historic examples, we started pulling out some key learnings and then offering trainings, sharing those with as many people as possible. So as you mentioned, just in the last few weeks, we're actually at the end of tonight, we'll have reached 8,000 people taking the Choose Democracy training, how to avoid an election-related power grab. And we're still going to continue offering those trainings with tweaks as events unfold. But I just want to share a little bit of what you would learn in that, because I think it's really important for us to ground ourselves in what works and not just in our deepest fears. One of the things that we're seeing, and maybe all of you are feeling, is just a lot of anxiety about this election. And so when we look at successful attempts to thwart coups, we find 4 keys that run through those stories.
4 keys to defeat a coup. Political scientist Stephen Zunis studied historical cases where people won against an attempted coup. His research shows there are 4 keys to success. Number 1, widespread mobilization. In Russia, in 1991, Gorbachev was captured by some of his opponents who wanted to take over the country. All over the country, masses of people took to the streets in widespread resistance. The leaders of the coup did not do much to win popular support for their power grab. Number 2, nonviolent discipline. The coup plotters surrounded the parliament building in Moscow with tanks and soldiers. Large crowds gathered to urge the soldiers to desert. Some protesters were injured and killed, but the rest continued their nonviolent resistance. At first, individual soldiers deserted, and then whole military units. The coup plotters gave up. Number 3, alliance building. In 1920, Germans were more polarized than Americans are today, but alliance building helped them defeat a coup led by the right-wing Wolfgang Kapp. The left united to support the centrist governing party. Number 4, refusal to recognize illegitimate authority. The German centrists refused to negotiate with Kapp. Workers declared a general strike. When he went to the Capitol building to begin his rule, no one was there, not even someone to type the manifesto saying he was now in charge. The coup was defeated within days. We can learn valuable lessons from history. In the United States, we have a president who has openly said he might not respect the outcome of our election. We have to be ready to resist if he claims victory before votes are counted, tries to stop counting ballots, or refuses to accept a loss. Nonviolent mass protests and strikes have stopped coups in other places, and we may have to do the same here.
And so part of the purpose of the trainings has been to plant this seed with people like, yes, it could happen here. Americans are used to thinking that things can't happen here that we might encourage in other places, but a coup really could happen here. It's important that we use that language to really clarify what's going on. Voter suppression is part of what's happening, and that is a really important issue in and of itself. But we're using the coup language to really distinguish when someone has crossed certain lines in, say, saying that all the votes won't be counted. So that's one of the primary things that people are watching. Is every vote going to be counted? And that's a democratic value that we can argue for, again, across the usual bubbles. Like, there are a lot of people in the center who may not agree with me on all political issues, but they would agree that every vote should be counted. So coming out of the training, we've been encouraging people to take action. And in these weeks leading up to the election, one of those actions has been to contact your local elected officials and really encourage them to take a stand that every vote will be counted in their area. One of the advantages we have in the United States is a lot of decentralization to our government. And so whether it's on the county level or the city level or the state level, there are a lot of political players who can be pressured to play a role in making sure that things go well in their state, that every vote is counted in their state. And so by getting out ahead of this, by having tens of thousands of people sign a pledge saying that they will resist if that's not done, our hope is that that will help to thwart a coup before it ever happens. We know that in the 80s, Ronald Reagan wanted to invade Nicaragua, and many, many people signed a pledge of resistance, and then he didn't invade Nicaragua. That played a role in the climate fight against the Keystone XL pipeline as well. People pledging to do civil disobedience if our politicians don't do the right thing. So there's a number of strategies like that. In the event of an actual coup, I'm so happy to hear, the union representatives here, because that is going to be really important. Organized labor plays a crucial role in these stories. Many federations are looking at the possibility of a general strike in the event of a coup. I was thinking of Sarah saying that the planes can't take off without the flight attendants. And so if people have a general strike and refuse to go to work, that will have a major impact. Pressuring businesses is also a way of pressuring our political system because we know how much influence money has. So two other things I'll say about how this relates to women in particular. One, reading these stories of past coups being thwarted, I noticed that a lot of the histories were written by men, and so the stories of women were not highlighted. But I also saw women very present in these stories, reading between the lines. So one of them is a coup in 1920 from Germany, where a man named Wolfgang cop, declared himself the ruler. He was from the right-wing party, and everybody recognized that this was a problem who wasn't part of the right wing. So the centrists and the left-wing groups, which often fought with each other, very quickly came together and built an alliance. They called for a general strike, which included the government workers. And so when Wolfgang went in to write a proclamation saying that he was the new leader, he couldn't find anyone to type it for him because, being a man of that era, he didn't know how to type. So the next day he brought his daughter in to type his proclamation. But basically the coup only lasted a few days, because if the people aren't supporting you, you won't be able to get away with that kind of thing. So we have to think about how we can operate in a way that refuses to cooperate with a coup. And that's going to be different for different people in different sectors, whether you're a politician or a union leader or any variety of roles. Part of what we do in the training is help people to think about, how can I plug into this? What will be my piece? The last thing I'll say for myself personally is learning the skills of nonviolent direct action has been so empowering to me as a woman. I've been an activist for 35 years, but much of it was not doing direct action until the last 10 years in the climate movement. Realizing that I can interrupt a corporate shareholder meeting, realizing that in organizing with other people, we can really build power and challenge authority in ways that I was not taught to. I was taught to ask nicely, to write a polite letter, to make a phone call to my senator. And it took me a ridiculously long time to realize that as long as my senator is taking money from the fossil fuel industry, the polite letter is not going to get me anywhere. But once I finally got that, once I finally realized that working with other people, we could build real grassroots power, it changed my life in so many ways. I went to a women's conference once where some of the women were doing that coal walking thing where people walk on hot coals and it's supposed to be like this empowering experience. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but come do direct action. You get that same feeling of empowerment, and it's free and actually makes a difference, and is one of the best ways that we can use to disrupt injustice. I think it's going to be really key in this upcoming period. There's a chance that all the organizing by many groups ahead of time will make it unnecessary. And that's my greatest hope, that people will get trained and then use these skills for the other issues that have been raised tonight. But if not, it's really an important time for us to come together to use the power that we've been building to affect all of the issues that we care about that have been named tonight. So I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
People are peaceful, we know what to do. We're rising up together till we stop this. You see the people are peaceful, we know what to do. We're rising up together till we stop this. Together, let's get it. The people are peaceful, we know what to do. We're rising up together till we stop this. Let's get it. The people are peaceful, we know what to do. We're rising up together till we stop this. Black women, come on. The people